Hello everyone, this is Nobody's here, you can call me Nobody, and there most certainly aren't any bodies in my room right now. What you are watching right now is the fruit of weeks of struggle and also my first video essay. The script for this is over 10k words long, even without the intro and outro, and with that one of the longest things I've ever written for a one-off project, especially in this short amount of time. That all to say, please don't be too harsh with me in the comments when it comes to the technical side of the video. I have, frankly, no idea what I'm doing. Now, onto the actual video. How to Train Your Dragon, a beloved franchise of 3 films and 2 series. The movies are arguably some of the best in animation, and they comfortably hold the top spot in the list of my personal favorite movies, even after watching K-pop Demon Hunters. So, when I heard that the first movie was getting a live-action remake after 15 years, I had mixed feelings, to say the least. On the one hand, my favorite movie of all time would be put in the spotlight again, the fandom would spring to life. On the other, the track record of live-action remakes is anything but good. How to Train Your Dragon had an uphill battle to fight here, and I didn't, and still don't know which side I stand on. I watched the movie exactly once, in the theater. I had a notepad and a pen and frantically scribbled notes during the entire movie, filling about 785 pages with them. They were trilingual and sometimes written multiple times over. Because of this, I then had to rewrite them to at least make them legible. If you're wondering how or why I was making so many notes, know that I know the first movie almost by heart, just not in English. I actually watched the new movie in German, but the lines were almost always the same, so I still caught the changes they made. I won't make an in-depth analysis of the movie in this video, but if this gets traction, I might make a follow-up going over all my thoughts on it. For what's relevant here, I think the movie as a standalone was very good, the sets and props were phenomenal, so was the CGI. The acting was also very good in most scenes. Certain changes to the original bettered the movie for the live-action context, some dragged it down. Most of the soundtrack I really liked, only the Forbidden Friendship track, there was a change that made me really mad and is probably my least favorite part of the movie. Considering it lasts less than 10 seconds, you can tell that this piece of music and the scene accompanying it are really important to me. I'd say this movie is an 8 out of 10 if you don't know the original by heart, a 5 out of 10 if you do. Honestly, if it weren't for this video, I would have forgotten it exists at this point though. Watch the original, it's better, and it's not a live-action remake. The focus of this video is the dragon's character designs. I won't be commenting much on anything else here. Know that the sections will get shorter as the video goes on, simply because I have less to comment on or critique, since I'll be starting with the designs I like the least. In each section, I'll first analyze the design that we got, then propose my idea of a live-action version of the respective dragon. Alright, let's get into it. Let's start with the titular butcher himself. TOOTHLESS's design is what pushed me into this video. Something about him just screams uncanny valley, an ugly middle ground between cute and cool. At first I assumed it was the big eyes that were throwing me off, and don't get me wrong, they are huge. But after looking closer at his design and actually taking time to draw it and compare it with the animated Toothless, I found quite a lot more wrong with him. I'll start with the face, as that is the part of the design I take most issue with. First off, and this is going to be a theme in this video, is Toothless's shape language. When we look at his animated, or as I'll be saying, canon face, we see a very triangular head. His head is lean and relatively flat, his eyes are narrow, and the slickness continues down his body. In flight, we can simplify his shape into a very elongated triangle, as shown here. From top view, he takes the shape of a narrow teardrop with wings and fins for lift. It's clear to us from the movement we see what his niche as a dragon is. He is fast and stealthy, blink and you'll miss him. This is what we're told when Night Fury is introduced, but we also see it reflected in his design. I'll get back to this with the other dragons. Now, let's take a look at his live-action counterpart. Looking at his head, we immediately see the difference. The very triangular, narrow shape language is replaced by much blockier shapes. I simplified them into this box with a short pyramid attached for the snout. These shapes are reminiscent of those we see in The Hidden World, the movie I assume they reference for the designs, or even slightly in How to Train Your Dragon 2, but we never see them in Teenage Toothless. This body is also larger and more angular, with the rough texture of the scales further taking away from the sleekness of the design. If I was asked about a dragon constructed with shapes similar to this, I'd most likely tell you I expect them to fill a pure firepower role, not one of a sneaky speedster. Now for his proportions. I alluded to this already, but when I first saw Toothless' design, I attributed the uncanniness to his large eyes. Looking at him after my analysis, I find they are less too big and more in the wrong place. The face surrounding the eyes doesn't fit them. In this rendition, Toothless' eyes almost bulge out of his head when we look at him from 3/4. They are facing forward, and the pinkish eyelids make them look slightly puffy. His cheeks extend beyond the eyes, rounding the sides of his face and bulking it out further. His eyebrows, which I'll talk about later, don't help this effect. When we compare these eyes to those of Canon Toothless, it's like comparing a well-proportioned wolf with a helplessly inbred pug. Canon Toothless' eyes are set surprisingly far back, leaving enough room to call the front of his face a snout. They're much deeper in his head, in teardrop-shaped indentations, thus not bulking out the shape. The cheeks also don't extend far beyond that ridge, being relatively flat. The eyes are narrow as opposed to round, and the pupils are tendentially narrow, with a wide range of width expressing different emotions Toothless is feeling. In contrast, live-action Toothless has very oval eyes, with just as oval pupils, which, while they can widen, barely ever turn into slits, including when Toothless is either deathly terrified or furious in his first encounter with Hiccup. I don't want to say it, but I think the dragon that played Toothless in this movie was high on dragon nip for most of the filmmaking. Drugged so hard they cut it from the script. Something interesting I found out about pupils when searching for this video is that in reptiles, round pupils generally imply daylight activity. A dragon whose entire gimmick relates to them being nocturnal should not have pupils adjusted for diurnal hunting, which is why it bothers me that Toothless has mostly rounded pupils in the live-action movie. In contrast, vertical pupils are often seen in ambush predators because they allow the user to gauge the exact distance their prey is from them. Toothless, as we see him in canon, is one of the sharpest shooting dragons, and by all means ambushes the Vikings in the beginning of the story. Just another reason to put on the pile of eye problems the new one faces. A last note I have about the eyes, and note here that this doesn't draw much comparison with the animated version, is the lack of a sclera. Toothless has big eyes. As a nocturnal dragon, that is reasonable for him. What I find less reasonable is the complete lack of anatomy within these eyes. No matter how far to the side Toothless looks, his irises seem to be never-ending. If you've ever had a dog or horse or cow or cat or most other mammal-adjacent animals try to get a look at you, you might have noticed the eye whites. In humans, these are very pronounced, and you can see them even when relaxed. Reptiles often lack movable eyes, but considering some of Toothless' expressions, we can assume that he can move his. I did have to Google this, but reptiles do in fact have an uncolored sclera, which is usually hidden from view. I will draw partly from cats here, but also photos I found of lizards' eyes. Using these references, I find perfectly reasonable for Toothless to have his eye whites show when he looks somewhat far to the side, as I would like to imagine a dish-like iris which encompasses less than half of the eyeball. You can see that this looks quite cute in cats, which is a nice bonus and another reason I don't understand why they didn't add this. In my redesign, I'll show exactly what I mean by this, but for now, let's move on. Now, the eyes are far from the only problem with Toothless' face. The biggest issue I take with this design are the eyebrows. You'll see it in my redesign, but I decided to scrap them completely. The eyebrows manifest as two bulky elevations on Toothless' forehead and form a strong ridge over Toothless' eyes. This ridge makes the face feel squished and square. Most of the expression in Toothless' face are derived from the eyebrows. He can furrow them and raise them. I bet if he tried, he could even pull the DreamWorks face. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a great thing that Toothless is expressive at all. The designers at DreamWorks must have heard all of the criticism Disney's been receiving over their Lion King and took it to heart. This is a good thing. However, I find these eyebrows, paired with the large front-facing eyes and almost non-existent snout, make Toothless look too human, namely in front view. When he pulls an expression, we can immediately link it to the human equivalent. This isn't a bad thing per se, but we have to keep in mind that, as of the first movie, Toothless is still by all means a wild animal, and a solitary one at that. He does not have the natural intuition to communicate his emotions to others, especially not to humans specifically. I'll pull from my wolf-pug analogy again. While wolves are pack animals and communicate their needs to each other via expressions and body language, it isn't reflected one-to-one with how we humans communicate. Bared teeth mean aggression, keep your distance, as opposed to a welcoming smile. Narrow or squinted eyes mean calm, satisfaction, not, I am suspicious of you. These are not catch-alls for communication and are only examples, but they illustrate some differences between our languages. While wild animals like wolves have this type of body language, domesticated animals such as dogs or cats have assimilated their communication methods to convey their message to us humans. An open mouth with a hanging tongue can be read as a smile to us and conveys a calm dog. The puppy dog stare when a dog begs for treats is created by pulling up a muscle specifically evolved for this purpose, to enlarge the eyes and imitate the sad expression humans make. Tangent about animal facial expressions aside, let's get back to Toothless. But nobody, you might be saying, they gave Toothless eyebrows because that's how he emotes in the movie. That is true. Toothless is incredibly expressive, even in the first movie where he takes the least after Hiccup's body language. There is even the joke in the third movie about how Toothless has been domesticated to a point where he lost the ability to communicate properly with his species. However, looking at Toothless as he is in the first movie, we find that he barely emotes with the bony ridges above his eyes. In fact, they seem to be largely immobile. His large variety of expressions can often be attributed to his bulky, highly movable eyelids, paired with an occasional flaring of the nose or the position of his frills. The pupils also aid us greatly in understanding what he's feeling. A good example of this I found is this relatively cartoony grimace Toothless pulls when Hiccup tries to touch him for the first time. We see that all the expression is derived from the eyelids, the teeth-out growl, and the flared nostrils with his frills filling the purpose of an animal's ears. The live action solved this expression mostly by furrowing his brow, though I do appreciate the flared nose. During romantic flight, Toothless is proud of himself for getting Astrid on their side. In the animated movie, a slightly squinty eye, relaxed frills, and very slightly turned up corner of the mouth communicate this to us. In the live action, Toothless straight up smiles knowingly, shooting a glance at the camera's direction. Or, if he doesn't, tell me what the hell he's doing here, because this expression made me pause in disbelief in the cinema. There is a couple more expression-related things I will cover in my redesign. I think they are too specific to be summed up here. Showing how I would change them will also help in those cases. Moving down from the head and onto the neck, we see that it is very chunky in the first movie, starting out about the width of the head and broadening down to the width of his shoulders smoothly. If we look at Toothless in flight from below, we find that snout to shoulders he forms an essentially triangular shape. From the side it is quite similar, and despite the flatness of his head, the neck still is relatively bulky at its base. In the live action, we see little to no change to the neck in profile view, save for the fact that Toothless's spikes are uninterrupted between the head and shoulders, which I actually do not mind. From the front, the neck is oftentimes a bit skinny, creating, again, a more humanoid appearance within Toothless, as it looks like his head is sitting atop his neck instead of transitioning into it horizontally. I believe this is due to the broad cheeks the live-action dragon has, more so than an actually disproportionately thin neck. On a positive side, live-action Toothless has a slight chin flap, like an iguana or similar would. Not enough to distract from the main parts of his design, but enough to be noticeable. This is a feature I greatly appreciate, as it makes Toothless appear more animalistic for once. A flap of skin like this is a feature we can see in animals ranging from cows and horses over reptiles to even some birds like the pelican. Finally, moving on to the body. This section will be relatively short, as I don't have a lot to say about most of his body parts, or at least the majority of it isn't as excruciating detail as the face. Overall, I really like the design of the body. The proportions feel natural and reasonable. He has enough mass as to appear realistic, but doesn't add unnecessary skin details or wrinkles in most places. After only watching the movie and not studying his body in detail, I was quite happy with how the designers had translated the body, as my main gripes were, and honestly still are, with it in the face. Before the praise is over, I want to quickly talk about the legs. I really like them. I'm aware it's weird to pay this much attention to a fictional animal's legs of all things, especially considering they are never a very important body part to the story, but when looking at the design as a whole, I think they are still one of, if not the best executed part of the design. If you have ever drawn Toothless, you might have noticed that his lower limbs are quite chunky, creating once again the shape of an upward-facing triangle. This shape is kept reasonably well by the live-action design, but translated in a way to not feel too cartoonish. Even the skin folds by his toes look reasonable, though I do change them in my redesign, as you will see later. The only nitpick I have about the legs is the fact that they lack the larger scales on the lower limbs. Considering Toothless already has quite large scales all over his body, I think it's a bit of a shame they didn't add some larger, sturdier, more protective scales on Toothless' legs. Something I didn't know or notice in either movie is that Toothless has a scar in his right front from when Hiccup shot him down. This was kept in design, which I applaud. Toothless' hind legs are quite long, which isn't something I mind. Just thought I'd mention it since in canon Toothless' hinds are equal or even shorter than the fronts, regardless of the movie we're looking at. Praise time is over for now. We have talked about the legs. Now it's time to talk about Toothless' remaining pair of limbs, his wings. And I have to go on a rant about wing shapes and physical reasons behind those wing shapes for this, but first things first. Toothless' wings look different in this movie. Namely, they reduced the number of digits from 7 to 5, a change I don't mind, and they significantly shortened the first digit of the wing. I didn't even really notice this while watching the movie, but the longer I think about it, the more it bugs me. I first thought they were referencing bat wings since the physiology is reasonably similar, but after looking those up, I'm stumped. Bat wings have a shape much closer to those of canon Toothless, triangular with the first finger being the longest. My next best guess for a match were rounder types of bird wings, like those often seen in songbirds like the sparrow or blackbird. Those aren't a very close match either, as they have a broader base as opposed to the deep indent in the wing Toothless has where it connects to the body. It's still the first digit throwing me off. Were it longer or similar to those behind it, we'd have a good match with the passive soaring wing, the wings in eagles, and the flying style matching that of Toothless. In fact, animated Toothless has that wing shape, mixed with the high-speed wing. Again, something matching his flying style and role in the team. This isn't about me complaining that Toothless' wings don't match his flying style anymore. It's about me being completely and utterly stumped about if those wings even have a flying style. They don't match any bat wings I found on Google search, they don't match any bird wings I found on Google search. Out of desperation, I even looked at insect wings. Again, no matches. I know that dragons are mythological creatures, but the best part about mythological creatures to me is their viability in our world. Speculative evolution and biology. And considering this movie actually brings in some of that with how dragons breathe fire, I can't fathom how they wouldn't look at existing wings to reference for their main character. The thing they remind me most of is Hookfang's wings because of the narrow base, but even that guy still has the first digit actually aiding in flight be the longest. Alright, so we established that Toothless' wings don't have a real-life equivalent. If you find one, let me know. Now, I'd like to see if a wing shape like this would be feasible, and if Toothless could function the way he did in the movie. I am neither a physicist nor a biologist, so keep that in mind. I will be going off the things I know and learned at some point and things I looked up from the internet. Just really quickly, for those who have never looked at the function of wings and basics of aerodynamics, let's imagine air as a stream flowing against the direction of the wing. There are shapes that allow better, smoother airflow than others. For basics, this will be the basic wing shape we look at, a slightly curved, flattened teardrop shape. Because this shape allows for faster airflow below than above, this pushes the wing upward. I'll just say Toothless' wing has this sort of cross-section. In some places, this shape starts to break apart, though the long tip with only a single bone in the middle supporting it seems like it would be a more triangular cross-section than a teardrop. Now comes the part where I'm less confident about my aerodynamics, so take what I say with a grain of salt. The triangle shape should separate the air less smoothly than the teardrop and create some turbulence and drag in the air surrounding it. This probably wouldn't impact Toothless' flying capabilities that significantly, but it might slow him down. Reminder at this point that Toothless is a speedster. Another thing I find strange is the narrow base of Toothless' wings. In the free fall scene during test flight, Toothless has to slow his fall by spreading his wings. With a wing base this narrow, it makes it seem more difficult for me. Let's imagine the airflow in this situation for a second. There is air pushing on the wing from below. Since there is more surface toward the middle point of the wing than at the base of the wing, there will be a greater force pushing in that spot. That will push the ends of the wings upwards, essentially collapsing them behind Toothless. With a broader wing base, like Canon Toothless has, the air pushing up against the wing will provide a lot of lift right at the body, therefore helping push it up first, the wings after it, essentially. This will allow Toothless to support his own weight with his wings, even though he's falling. So, in conclusion, the wing shape would likely slow Toothless down in normal flight and not support his weight in free fall. If there was a mistake in my thought process, let me know as always. Tangent about aerodynamics aside. After this exhausting section about wings, we can finally move on to another part of Toothless' body. This took longer than I maybe would have liked it to, but alas, I said I'd be going into detail on my analysis, so I'm going into detail. An actually plot-relevant body part of Toothless is, of course, his tail. This was kept essentially identical in the remake, though the two spike rows after a secondary pair of wings are replaced by a single line of spikes going from the head all the way to the tail. While I prefer the canon design here, I don't mind this decision. Where Hiccup shot him down and his tail fin is missing, live-action Toothless actually has some remains of it, which are more noticeable than in canon. This is a detail I really appreciate, as it always bugged me with the original that there was very little actual scarring. There is no blood or anything, which in the animated I took for granted, and in this is a decision I respect. I had very little to say about the most important body part of the movie. I guess they did a good job with it, which honestly is what I would expect. This isn't really about Toothless, but I absolutely love the physicality of Toothless' prosthetic. The prop looks incredible, which is expected with this level of set work, but still made me very happy when I saw it on screen. Last thing I want to talk about is affects the hull of Toothless. In the first movie, he has a subtle pattern, which is probably best seen in the series. He has silver spot stripes on his back starting at his neck. These were sadly lost in the live-action remake in favor of a pure black color. Also, they made his scales rougher, which I touched on earlier. These scales, ranging from rough to relatively small and smooth, cover his entire body, including the spikes on his back. This complies with the canon design, though I still find it a little funny looking. I understand why that is what they did with the spikes though, so I'm not going to complain. In my redesign, it probably won't look much different. I wouldn't want to sit here and critique someone else's work without trying my own hand at it. If my redesign of Toothless, or any other dragon for that matter, doesn't end up to your liking, please let me know. I'm pulling a lot of this out of my personal design biases and love hearing constructive criticism. First thing I did for this redesign, just exploring Toothless' face, was to draw Toothless as he is in both the live action and animated movie using reference. With all redraws, I tried to stick as close to it as possible, but I didn't trace, so it might not be perfect. Once I had drawn my points of comparison, I sat down and tried to draw a basic headshot of Toothless how I would imagine him. I ended up coloring this headshot, but keep in mind that it's still pretty much a sketch. In the end of the video, I want to redraw little promotional posters of the dragon, so here you'll see a more rendered version of this design. I tried to stick to the basic head shape established by the animated Toothless. The biggest point here was, again, the eyes. I gave him a somewhat cat-like shape with the upper eyelid creating a triangle both in front and behind it. He also now has a third translucent eyelid that is visible when he's emoting at times. When he looks to the side, his sclera is visible, but his irises are large enough to cover the entire eye when relaxed. The ridges above his eyes are now mostly immobile and don't create a blocky shape over his entire forehead. This ridge covers the eye in 3/4 view, as Toothless' eyes don't point straight forward anymore. I'll talk more about the way he emotes later, but the heavy lifting for the eyes is now done by the eyelids instead of the eyebrows. I modeled Toothless' nose mostly after that of a sheep or bunny, with actually separated nostrils, because I really like the idea of his nostrils flaring and showing the pinkish color inside. Toothless' mouth now extends to about the outer corner of the eyes, with the ability to stretch slightly further, but not by far the same ability we humans have. His mouth also has a slight nick in it that is most noticeable in the second movie, as I quite enjoy that shape. Toothless' frills have a slightly more pointed shape and a more noticeable inside. I also added a small pair under his main frills to mimic the live action for once, though his bottommost frill is incredibly small. Since Valka can tell Toothless' age by counting the frills on his chin, I can back this decision up by saying that Toothless may be aged up. He's the same age as Hiccup, and I'm relatively sure that guy isn't meant to be 15 in the live action. Toothless' frills also have some slight wrinkles at their base, mostly when Toothless moves them upward. I added a slight pinkish tint to the tips of the frills and Toothless' snout, as well as the inside of his eyelids and his nostrils. Otherwise, Toothless doesn't have a pattern on his face and is black with a blue tint. Looking at the neck in this headshot, we see that I have it extend out very horizontally. We can also see the slightly lighter silverish patterns on it. His chin has a small flap I talked about with the live action design. Like the live action Toothless, this redesign also has spikes running along his neck uninterrupted. After the first sketch, I started exploring Toothless' anatomy, like his mouth and flared nose. I really leaned into scrunching up the face here, as I want to avoid him looking lifeless, and also enjoy drawing growls and snarls. We see how mostly the front of the top lip is pulled up, revealing even the gums. Toothless' teeth are uniform, just like in either movie. At this point, I also started exploring the idea of the way Toothless could emote. With his angry expression, charging up a fire shot, and an arched neck, I found it fitting that he would stand up his frills as a way to make himself look bigger and more intimidating. You can also note the little bit of smoke coming out of the corner of his mouth. The live-action movie made the cool implication that all dragonfire, not just the zipplebacks, works on the basis of this flammable gas. In the two-headed dragon, this mechanism is of course split in two, but in a dragon like Toothless, his head covers both processes. I thought this was a cool detail and definitely something I would keep. The lower and third eyelids are also partly up in this expression to protect Toothless' eyes from the incoming heat. I explored Toothless' snarl further by drawing a more closed-mouth version in 3/4. It's honestly not my favorite drawing of the lot, but that's alright. Again, Toothless' frills are perk, his front teeth are showing, and his nose is flared. His lips have a slight W shape to them, as opposed to the straight lip in the live action and the V-shaped one in the original. This is due to the fact I was mostly leaning on mammals as reference for the snarl. In canon, Toothless' face doesn't crease much when he's angry, but personally I really enjoyed when animal faces do that, so I admittedly self-indulgently made my Toothless scrungly regardless. On the other side of the spectrum, we have Toothless' more positive emotions. I like to imagine him nearly closing his eyes and raising his third eyelid when he's content. The chin flap can also inflate a bit and vibrate when he's snickering about something. His frills are relaxed and teeth retracted. When Toothless attempts to smile at Hiccup, his pupils widen and his third eyelid partly closes. His teeth are retracted and frills mostly relaxed, maybe slightly raised in curiosity. His face crunches up with the same muscles as when he's snarling, but since he doesn't show teeth, we know he understands this as a friendly gesture from Hiccup. While we're already talking about his retracted teeth, I also made a sketch looking at the scene where Hiccup presents Toothless the fish. Most things seen here I already mentioned before, but I think it's worth noticing how his nose is slightly pulled up here too, since his lip is raised a bit when his mouth is open, so that we can see a glimpse of his gums, even in the front. Looking at the inside of his mouth, I gave him a coarse tongue, again inspired by a cat. His gums also aren't bumpy like in the live action. Instead, I gave him little divots where you can see the very tip of the tooth hiding inside. It might not be the most realistic solution, but considering retractable teeth don't exist in a similar form to Toothless, I don't feel particularly bad going for the more visually appealing solution. At least I hope it will be more visually appealing than whatever the live action did. With the exploration of Toothless's expression mostly done, I moved on to drawing some canon expressions. I won't explain every single detail about these since I would probably just repeat myself at this point. Some of the angles on these aren't perfect and the redrawn references aren't traced, and so might not be 100% accurate, but I did try. Once I felt confident with Toothless's face, I moved on to his body. Since I liked a lot of it, I didn't change tons, save for the texturing and the wings, which are actually what I'm going to talk about first. I stuck to the shape of the canon wings but reduced the number of digits from 7 to 5, just like the live action. I also tried to give Toothless some muscle definition in his wings. The membrane connecting the equivalent of the wrist to the shoulder was something I quite liked from the live action as well, so I streamlined its shape. Canon Toothless actually also has this membrane, it just isn't as noticeable a lot of the time since it isn't very prominent. I made Toothless's wing base quite broad and even connected the membrane of the wing to that of the secondary wing. Again, something that is relatively close to what we see in canon. I gave the edges of his wing membranes a slightly pinkish tint again. His tail I kept close to canon as I could, with a nice tail fin remains seen in live action. I said I really liked live action Toothless's legs, and so I mostly kept them. I did shorten his hind legs to be more accurate to canon though. I also added small vestigial thumbs to all 4 of his legs. I smoothed out some of the wrinkles above his toes since he doesn't actually move there, so the loose skin isn't necessary, and instead added the larger scales. In his armpits I added wrinkles on the other hand, since Toothless needs mobility there. I'm referencing what I know here, and horses have wrinkles between their front legs, so I gave Toothless some too. Toothless's patterns cover most of his torso and go down his upper legs, but then fade, so all Toothless's extremities are patternless. With the full body, I jumped almost straight into redraws. This is mostly since I knew right away of a good pose to push the limits of Toothless's body, his sit. In the live action movie, they completely ditched it, which I was very disappointed by. The way Toothless mimics Hiccup in that scene is iconic, and having him sit normally defeats a lot of the purpose there. So I went to drawing Toothless making that pose just to prove he could, and it could look reasonable. It's not a 3D render, but in my opinion, it looks pretty solid and feasible without Toothless breaking any bones. Another pose, I redrew Toothless' iconic face when he realizes he has a prosthetic fin. This one was pretty expression focused, but getting the wings right in that perspective was also a fun challenge. Next to this one, I practiced some more expressions, finally getting comfortable with Toothless's design. I also redrew the face from Romantic Flight I mentioned. It doesn't look half bad in sketch form. I'm not sure whether to attribute that to my deviations or the lack of lighting. In either case, I closed Toothless's eye again and made him look forward instead of at the camera. I'm not 100% content with the shape of his head here, but this angle was relatively challenging, so I'll give myself a pass. The last big redraw I did was from Test Flight when he needs to ease the fall of his wings. I tilted Toothless's head upward and in general exaggerated pose more, with his front legs being more forward and having spread toes. I'm also quite happy with how the wings look in this one. I kept Toothless's gear and prosthetic the same in every redraw I did, which is why in one sketch it matches the live action and in another canon. I'm not sure I'd be able to redesign it properly and trust the animators and designers that they understood what they were doing, so I'm not going to redesign it. So here you have it, my Toothless redesign. Definitely tell me what you think about him down below, and stick around for the rest of the video because oh boy are these other dragons gonna give me trouble.